Hello, everybody. This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts Podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving.
Hello, today we get to learn lots and lots of different things from Sara Tyler, who is a world schooling mom, and she is also an author and a businesswoman. So I'm so excited. I've never met Sara before. She stepped up and was more than willing to share her story. So please welcome Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am so happy that you agreed to this. And where are you calling in from today?
So this week we've been doing a really big road trip through northern and central Mexico for the past week and a half, and today we're in Guanajuato.
And do you live in Mexico permanently?
Yeah, we live in Veracruz. That's our home base, but we travel about 40% of the time.
And how many kids do you have?
I have two too many today. They are. You'll probably hear them. They're on fire today.
How old are they?
So my oldest daughter, Sophia, is 6.5. And she's the one that we world school, but we kind of also world school the younger one, who's 3.5 by default, right? Because she's there. So she's getting a head start on everything.
That's awesome. And how long have you been doing this?
So when COVID started, my daughter we did the typical thing that, first time parents do. And we got the most expensive private school. We put her in like the best bilingual school that we could find. And when COVID happened and they shut down all the schools, it really was a blessing in disguise, because I never would have thought of homeschooling or world schooling or unschooling. And now I can't imagine it the other way around.
That's amazing. And where did you live pre-COVID?
So we were in Mexico, and when COVID happened, when everything shut down, we ended up in Playa del Carmen for almost a year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you were already in Mexico.
Right. Yeah. My youngest daughter was born about 6 weeks before COVID. So she didn't have a passport. She didn't have American birth certificate yet. And all the embassies shut down. So there wasn't even a way to get them.
Oh, wow.
So we kind of got stranded, I guess you could say, but in a good way.
And where are you from originally?
So I grew up outside of Philadelphia.
Oh, okay. Very far from home.
But that's kind of the point, because I don't like the snow, not crazy about the cold.
I hear you. That's why I left New York City. So I 100% get it. Yeah. Do you work? Does your partner work? How do you guys support yourselves?
So as I mentioned, I always have a million projects going on, which I'm sure you can relate to. So my main business is publishing books, and I publish travel related books. Most of the authors that work with me are traveling moms with businesses. I say like 90%, and then 10% are writing about solo female travel.
And how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that for about 2.5 years.
Oh, so that's the recent.
Yeah, I have 6 books already, and 7 and 8 are in the works.
All right.
My husband has an Amazon store in Mexico, and we focus on outdoor camping, that kind of the stuff that we would buy and that we do buy. So everything that we do is all around like family travel.
That's so cool. Yeah. And, you've got your main niche, and you're just expanding on that. That's what Cody, I can't remember her last name, but a YouTube entrepreneur that I watch talks about, is to connect your businesses.
Yeah.
So you're doing that. That's great. And so are you needing to earn American type money, or because you're in Mexico, is your cost of living a lot less?
Oh, it's so much less. I mean, I earn a middle class salary in the United States, but if I lived in the United States, I would definitely be much more stressed about money. For example, we have our own house here. We have our own land. We own 2 cars. We don't have any debt. Everything is paid for with cash. And when I see people posting, friends from high school, and they're like, I can't even find a 1-bedroom apartment for under $2,000. I'm like, that's 2 trips I could take at least every month. The cost, we definitely take advantage of living below our means and the cost of living in Mexico.
So you're able to own your own home in Mexico without any strings. I know they changed things about 20 years ago, but
No, it's there is a law where you're not supposed, if you're a foreigner, you can't own, I think, within 5 kilometers of the beach. But there's a workaround where you basically start a shell company and you put the property in the name of the company that you own. So it's kind of a little loophole.
Okay. Nice. And do you spend a lot of time with expats where you live?
Not really. I mean, I'm here in Guanajuato visiting a friend, and she's an expat too. And I do have an expat group in Veracruz that I sort of inherited just by accident. We have meetups every other month, but on the whole, I don't seek out people who are expats to be friends. I mainly look for people who have kids and who like travel, that we have things in common.
And are you fluent in Spanish?
Yes. Yes. I used to be a Spanish and English teacher, language teacher.
Okay. So is that something that's beneficial for someone who's thinking of moving to?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Well, I jokingly call it the gringo tax, where if you don't speak Spanish, everything is just way more expensive, from taxi rides to, the rent that you're going to pay. If you're looking just in English, you're going to find really expensive apartments and houses. Everything's just a little bit more money.
Really? So the prices will vary depending on if you speak Spanish or not.
Oh yeah, if you're looking for, expats are always looking for like an English speaking dentist or an English speaking lawyer. And there are, but they definitely take advantage and charge a lot more money.
That's good to know.
So I guess it's just part of the service, right? The translation. And
I guess, in America, they don't charge extra if they speak a second language. But
I think it's more common here because a lot of people own their own businesses. So in the United States, we're used to being employees, so like a doctor. When I was a nurse, I didn't get paid any extra for speaking Spanish, even though, I was used like so much more than the other nurses, especially for the positions to help, but I didn't get paid more. But here, doctors will have their own office. Lawyers they're just working for themselves. Mm-hmm. They're self-employed, so they can really set their rates any way that they want.
That makes sense. So will you share with us what unschooling means to you?
Right, because there's a different definition depending on who you ask, right? So for me, there's two parts of unschooling, and I'm not the expert. I'm just figuring it out along with everybody else who has a 6.5-year-old. So for me, unschooling, I'm an academic. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. I'm an author, right? I love writing and reading. So it's very hard for me to de-school myself.
Oh, wait, stop. You need to explain what de-schooling is. Please.
We're just the more academic you are, we like to do things that are easy for us, right? So for me, taking tests is super easy. Writing papers, everything like that, it just comes easily to me. As a teacher, I know that doesn't necessarily reflect the knowledge that you know. And so de-schooling is really letting go of all of this, that you've really been programmed to think like this. You've been programmed to think, I need to send my kid to a traditional school, grades, A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever scale that they use are everything. It's really kind of taking away all of that programming that you've had since you were a little kid. And it's very hard for me. It was very hard for me to be like, oh my God, I need a curriculum. We all go through this phase. I need a curriculum. I need to keep up with this US standards and grade level. And you really have to just step back and focus on, my daughter's ADHD. So she's never going to be an academic like me. She's never going to be great at taking tests. So focusing on different ways that I can assess her and make sure that she understands. So it's a lot of work for the parent in that sense, right? Because you're always like worried, am I screwing this up? I don't want them to, be a failure as an adult. And it's a lot of it is taking away all those worries that we have as moms. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's go back to what your world schooling looks like. So we don't. At the beginning, I was like, oh my God, let me buy all the books off Amazon, right? And let's try to do this formally. And it's just frustrating for me, frustrating for my daughter, frustrating for everyone around. So we don't follow a schedule. I minored in history, so I love history. Every time we travel, we're going and we're seeing. We just went to the Mummy Museum here in Guanajuato. We went to the museum, the Desert Museum, which had all these dinosaurs. Everywhere we're going, we're including activities like that. And even if we go to the beach, for example, we went to Bacalar Lagoon. What we're doing is we're talking about, okay, what's the difference between a lagoon and a lake, a river, the ocean, salt water, fresh water. We're constantly going over that type of things with our daughters. And my 3.5-year-old will tell you, what animals are carnivores and what animals are herbivores and all kinds of things like that.
Wow.
Just from our conversations and following really what they're interested in, which is very different because every kid is different. So, my older daughter is all arts and crafts, and my younger daughter is very attracted to music and animals. So we're just trying to balance that to make sure that they're both getting real life skills and real life knowledge every day. It's not like we do it Monday through Friday. It's really every day with whatever's surrounding us, whether it's the garden in our backyard or getting to go to a really cool museum.
So what would you say the difference with world schooling and unschooling are?
I tend to use them interchangeably. Some people, and I know so much about it because I published a book on world schooling, and we had myself and 21 other authors. So reading that, reading everyone's definition, world schooling is really teaching with the world around you. It may or may not include travel. For us, it does include travel, but technically you could do it in your own city, right? Unschooling is not having the scheduling. I'm not going and I'm not saying, okay, we have an hour of math, and then we have an hour of reading, and then we have an hour of science. We're just taking it almost like project-based learning. Okay, today we're going to learn how to grow tomatoes. And we're just taking the lesson from that, which is going to include a little bit of weather, a little bit of science, and we're going to pull from the areas that we need. But it's very informal, but not in a bad way, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, informal would only be in a bad way if you deem that bad, right?
Right.
So you said you can world school in your own city. To me, world schooling means you travel away from your city. So how would you consider that world schooling?
So for me, the idea of world schooling is learning from the world around you. And if I were in Philadelphia, I could absolutely go to a museum in the city. I could take my daughter to the New Jersey beaches, right? You don't have to go far from home to be learning from what surrounds you. You could go to Lancaster, and learn about the Amish people that live there and how they build their houses and make amazing pretzels. So it's really just kind of opening your mind to really what you're seeing every day and being able to understand it. It's great if you can do it with travel, but I know families they're doing RV travel just in the US.
Mm-hmm.
There are other families who full time, they're bouncing from country to country. Everybody does it in a different way. And I think it just really depends on what works for them.
That's so awesome. Well, you taught me something because to me, I always thought world schooling meant you had to travel or that not that you had to, but that's what differentiated world schooling from other types of.
Yes. I mean, you could ask somebody else and they could say, yes, you absolutely have to travel. I've seen world schooling families that, they put their children in traditional school throughout the year, and then they do world schooling on summer break and Easter break and Christmas break. For some who went away for 1 or 2 years and then came back to their old life. So there's so many different varieties of it. Every kid is different. Every world schooling family is doing it differently.
That's awesome. So I'm asking this question of everyone because this is the question we all get. How do you socialize your children?
Well, I think for me, nobody really asks me that because our kids are so young. So we don't have teenagers yet. My 3.5-year-old, she, even if kids are around, she still prefers to play really by herself independently. My husband is Mexican and he comes from a huge family. So we got cousins, and more cousins and more cousins. But even if we didn't have cousins, for example, we do the meetups with the expat group, and there are always a couple of families that come. And I'm in a local, it's in Spanish, it's just local moms, their homeschooling group. And they do trips to the aquarium or trips to the parks or the zoos, and we can go do that too. There's always ways.
So, did you say that the homeschool group are all Spanish speaking? So is there a large group of Mexican homeschoolers at this point?
I think it varies from city to city. The one that I'm in has a couple hundred members in Veracruz. But I would expect if you go to Merida, there's so many more homeschoolers and so many more world schoolers and foreigners in general. It just depends on the city that you're in. I think it's definitely becoming more popular since COVID, and online education has just given people more options.
But so are more of them Americans who are expats, or are they Mexican?
Just Mexican families. Yeah, just
really?
Mexican families.
And and COVID's led to Mexican families doing it more.
It's just really opened up a lot of,
interesting.
when, for example, for us, I had so many meetings with the teachers that were like, your daughter just does whatever she wants. She doesn't listen to me like all the time. She got bad grades on this. Got bad grades on her English exam. I'm like, she's the only English speaker in the school. How did she fail that? We were having constant problems. So when COVID happened and it really was a blessing in disguise, I imagine a lot of other families felt the same way and just decided to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the lifestyle that we have, our kids, I know that there are kids that don't enjoy traveling so much, and our kids really do. They really are very flexible, and it's easy to travel with them. So we're lucky.
And your husband is totally on board with traveling and.
Oh yeah, he would have to be, because I did when I was, dating. I was a single mom with my daughter, Sophia. And when I was dating, I had this speech I would give, right? And be like, listen, travel is a part of my life. So this doesn't even need to go any further if you're not going to be traveling.
Well, that's good to know. And financially, if you had her in private school, it's got to be way less expensive to be world schooling at this point, right?
Oh yeah, the private schools here, there's such an economy within themselves, because not only are you paying for the tuition, the uniforms, the books, crazy expensive. The books are like $300 to $400
each,
and then for like the set of English books, the set of Spanish books.
Wow!
And then every day that we were sending her to school, we had to pay, I think it was $4. It was like a mandatory she doesn't even need anything anyway. She would never eat the lunches that they served her. So each day in the taxis going back and forth to the school before we got a car, I remember doing just looking at my bank account that first year and telling my husband, we spent twice as much on school as our rent. And I was like, this is preschool. Not even anything. So the expenses for us, yeah, it's much, much better. I mean, we definitely try to budget. We're not cheap, but we don't throw away money. So we definitely try to budget. It's not like we can go to expensive museums 5 times a week. That wouldn't really be realistic.
Are museum trips expensive? Can you get a membership to museums?
It's not like in the Smithsonian, right, where you can go to all the museums for free. They really can add up here. My husband's disabled, so he does have an ID where if they offer, like yesterday, we went to the Mummy Museum and he was free. And then both of my kids were free. They just happened to be under 6, so it only cost for me. But then sometimes we go and it's 2 and up, so we have to pay for both kids. We're paying for 4 people, everything we do. So it can add up.
And are you thinking into the future? Do you already have plans to homeschool indefinitely, or have you not thought about the future? Where are you at with that?
So I really would like to 100% have the kids, not necessarily that I'm being the teacher, but for them to be home and either be taking classes that interest them online or in person. But I definitely want to take advantage of, getting them tested out of school as soon as possible so that they're not limited. So that might be a GED or that might be an equivalency here in Mexico. I'm not sure yet, but I definitely want them to be able to follow their own interests, because my daughter's very hands-on. Like her ADHD, she's not a big studier. She's more of like, I want to do cooking. I want to learn how to sew. So I want them to spend their time doing things they're really interested in. And when I was younger, I mean, it was just like pulling teeth going to school and taking all these classes you really didn't like.
So you would have them go to classes that they chose rather than.
Yeah, 100%. And I was a teacher for 10 years, so I know that I can take any topic and we can be practicing math, science, history, culture, language. It's very easy for me to adapt that.
And typically teachers have a harder time becoming homeschoolers.
Yes.
How did you adapt to it so easily?
Well, I think that, when you become a teacher, we're not doing it for the money, obviously. It's very stressful, but we do it because we really want to make a difference. And I think we get into this occupation with these just ideas of how I'm going to make change and I'm going to do it this way. And then the reality is very different than what you expected. And a lot of the things that I had to teach were because I had to teach them. But knowing, being educated as a teacher, I'm like, I know this isn't the best way. I know that this kid is being left behind. This isn't going to work for this one. I knew all their different strengths and weaknesses. But when you have your own children, it really changes. I'm like, I don't want my daughter to be the girl left behind or the kid who just gets passed on to the next grade so the teacher doesn't have to deal with her again, or like the troubled child. And so I always try to think of it that way, because it really was, oh my God, the first summer when it was COVID and the lockdowns, it was a nightmare. But I really just try to think of it as, no one's going to have the interest of your child as much as you do. I'm always going to have her best interest at heart.
So was the nightmare having her in private school, or was the nightmare when you started homeschooling?
When we started homeschooling, because I was trying to I was trying to recreate really her school experience. And I'm so impatient about certain things, and like just trying to get her to write. Oh my God, it was just a nightmare. It was a nightmare getting her to sit down, pick up a pencil and practice writing. Just was not happening. So I would get frustrated, and then she would get frustrated, and it wasn't working. And that's part of that, going to unschooling and really just letting the education happen naturally.
So does that mean that you don't expect her to write anything at this point?
She writes great. No, she writes great. But I can't force her to write. I can't. And there's a great saying. It's like it's actually about language learning. And it says you can't force a child to speak a language, but you can set the stage so that they want to speak it. And so that's kind of, I gave her a calendar. I bought her like a journal. And so I make it so it's fun to write. And then I don't have to be like banging my head against the wall and being frustrated.
So you changed how you were instructing, and that changed the dynamics of your experience.
100%.
Awesome. And so when you first started homeschooling, were there things you were scared that would happen that didn't end up happening?
Like what do you mean?
I mean, like, I don't know. People are usually scared. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. How am I going to be with my kids all day long? Or something like that. Did you have these fears?
My biggest fear, that sounds kind of funny now that I talk about it, was physics and those kind of classes that I wasn't really good at. And I went to the World Schooling Summit this year. I helped organize it. And I was talking to one of the speakers about it. And she was like, physics? She's like, just bake with your daughter. And I was like, why? Well, we already do that. So that's great. I was like, but isn't physics like, test tubes and different, potions and things that they're. She's like, yeah, it can look like that. Of course, it can look like that. And a lot of times it does look like that in schools, but physics is so much more. And we had this great conversation where she really, again, it's just me putting pressure on myself that doesn't even need to be there.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the challenges that most people have who are afraid to start homeschooling is the pressure they put on themselves.
Yes, we do. We don't want to. Everyone is afraid I'm going to screw my kid up, right? Or I'm going to limit their opportunities in the future. I think is the biggest. What if she decides to go to college? Are they going to accept her? We have all these things running through our heads. A really big moment for us was after COVID ended. We were really concerned, like maybe our daughter was behind. And so we signed her up for school here in Mexico. And they took everybody. You didn't need to have any like usually they would ask for a certificate that you graduated kindergarten, but because of COVID and the situation, they took all the kids. And we were so worried that she was going to be behind and like we would have to get classes or a tutor or something. And she was the only kid in her class reading.
Oh, wow.
So the teacher started giving her second grade. This was first grade. He started giving her second grade work to keep her busy while he tried to help all the other kids learn how to read. So it was just us, again, just putting this pressure and these standards on ourselves that didn't need to be there.
So was that last year?
That was this school year.
Oh, this school year.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you decided to pull her out?
She's still in there. We didn't pull her out because when COVID happened, it was traumatic for her. And we didn't want her to feel like she did something wrong. Because when COVID happened, she would say like, Mommy, I'll be good. Please let me go back to school. She didn't understand why she couldn't go to school. So we're letting her finish out the year. But I mean, she's only there 50% of the time anyway. The rest of the kids haven't learned to read yet. So, it's kind of just her getting busy work.
Do you plan on putting her back in next year?
No, I'd love to find a forest school or Montessori or something like 2 or 3 times a week, but I haven't found anything locally yet.
And what about doing Montessori homeschooling with her?
No, I think that the world schooling is really where she's at. She thrives with going to new places because everything has to be so hands-on. So when we go, for example, she finally learned how to write by going to the beach and writing in the sand with her finger. Everything with her has that level of like interaction and touching.
Well, so would the Montessori just be a couple of hours a day?
I think that just would not be fun for either of us.
Oh, I thought you were saying you were looking for that for her.
No, but for her to go to some kind of play group or maybe like Girl Scouts, not Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts or something like that. I would like to have something just to take a few hours off of me a week, because she does have ADHD and she is hyper. She has got from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. She is 110% all the time, because I don't want her just sitting and learning just to be quiet at school and wait for everyone else to catch up. That's really not an education either.
So that is a great lead into what would you say is the hardest thing about homeschooling?
That I think the hardest thing for me is that your kids know how to manipulate you. They know you, right? They know how to get over on you. It's so much easier, especially as me being a teacher for so long. It's so much easier with other people's kids. It's not as easy with your own kid.
That's interesting. I never thought of it as them learning what pushes your buttons because they're spending so much time with you. And what would you say is the best thing about homeschooling?
Definitely the freedom and flexibility. We avoid traveling during spring break and during Christmas time, where most of the kids that go to school have to travel. We can go to the movies, on a Tuesday afternoon. Nobody's in the movie theater. Museum, same thing. We get to take advantage, not just financially, but, having more access, not being like in the crowds and everything like that. And we get to go more often for that reason. So it's a flexibility for me.
And do you live near the beach?
We do. We live about 5 minutes away.
Walking or driving?
Walking probably like 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah.
And the weather's nice there most of the time too, right?
Yeah, it's hot. It's hot. It's about to be the rainy season, so it'll cool off a little bit. But even everywhere we've traveled this past week and a half has been 95 to 105 degrees.
Wow. Is there any advice that you would want to give parents considering homeschooling?
I would say to try it. The best way to figure out if it's for you is to try it. If you're in the US, the school districts are typically really flexible about homeschooling. So if it doesn't work out, you can just send them back to school. There's really no downside to trying it. And I would say to try a couple different ways. If you're not familiar with how your child really likes to learn, try it a couple different ways, because some people like me, I'm a writer. I take notes and make lists and I write everything down and have different color pens. And I like to, be very analytical about things. And then someone like my daughter is very free spirited and likes to color outside the lines and always wants to be doing Play-Doh. And so sometimes we'll take like an anatomy lesson and we'll use Play-Doh to see if she understands. Can you make the heart? Can you make the human body? Can you put, the bladder where it goes and the kidneys where it goes? And that's how she grasps those concepts. So I would really encourage people to try a couple of different ways. It might be singing a song to one kid that works, or it might be taking down a diagram and notes for another kid, but you're not going to know until you really try the different ones.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us. I think this is wonderful and gives families such a different perspective, especially you living in Mexico. So awesome. Thank you, Sara.
No problem.